This is Title 18, Word Crimes. I'm Eric Arneson. On this episode, you'll hear Steve Weddle's short story, The Window, read by public radio reporter Scott Detrow. The New York Times called Steve Weddle's writing downright dazzling. His debut novel, Country Hardball, has been described as deeply honest, a book that shouldn't be missed, and a suspenseful series of interconnected stories. Country Hardball is fantastic, and it's available anywhere you buy books. Steve Weddle also edits Needle, a magazine of noir, one of the best magazines published today. He's a co-founder of the crime fiction blog Do Some Damage, and he's a writing instructor with Lit Reactor. Here is The Window, written by Steve Weddle, originally published in Off the Record 2 at the Movies, and read by Scott Detrow.
Paul stood at the window, a little removed, and watched the teenage boy slip into the woods. Paul was a landscaper, recently unemployed, and had nowhere else to be. A few minutes later, when the tea water whistled across the quiet house, Paul finished making his wife's breakfast, set the toast, the tea, the 2 eggs poached just so, and walked it up the stairs to her, put a pillow under her casted leg, walked back downstairs to the window. He watched the road in front of their home, the comings and goings of the morning. The blue Volvo with the Outer Banks sticker, a half-dozen grocery bags piled in the back seat. A white work truck, ladders, water cooler strapped to the side, slowing through the curve. He took the black and orange Afghan from the back of the rocking chair, set it on the chest next to the wooden bowl of decorative pine cones, turned the chair to the window, and waited for the boy to come out of the woods. After a half hour of watching the cars give way to the joggers, the woman bicycling with the twins, the old man with hairless legs walking and stopping, Paul got up from the window to check on Amy again. "Do you remember that time in Memphis?" Amy asked. He sat on the edge of the bed. "Yeah." He looked at her toes, the cracked nails, flecks of leftover red polish. She reached for his arm, looked off to the blank wall where he'd wanted to put a TV. "Remember how we went to see the ducks at that hotel, and the man in that captain's hat, and how we had key lime pie in the cafe?" Right. They had just been married, the whole world a map of options, of little dots waiting for your "we were here" pushpins. "Remember how we had to split a piece? Do you remember that? That pale little piece of pie and the crust all graham cracker crumbling and all?" He said he did. This house was third they lived in the past 15 years, one they'd expected to fill with children and birthday parties and dogs and barbecues. In the basement was a stack of photos they'd not yet unpacked, magazine pages from places they'd wanted to visit, a shoebox filled with plans. "We've come a long way since then," she said. "About 1,000 miles, I guess." "Oh, come on, goof," she swatted his arm. "You know what I mean." He took her hand in his, held it to his mouth, and said he knew what she meant. He tucked a sleep-matted clump of hair behind her ear. She looked to the windows. "Will you open the curtains on your way out?" "You need to rest." "I know, I just want to look outside this morning. Too bright. Please, I just want to feel the sunlight on my face, just a little bit." He got up, slid one of the curtain panels to the side. "There, that's enough. Now close your eyes and get back to sleep." He took the cup of tea she hadn't touched, the tray of food, carried it downstairs to the sink, and walked back to the front window to look for the boy. When her sister knocked on the front door, Paul left his sketches and walked her upstairs. She had short hair that she wore bobbed, rectangular glasses she didn't need, but had gotten after she'd seen them on someone else. She had flowers in her arms for Amy, irises, daylilies, purple and red and yellow. The types of flowers Paul enjoyed working with, the burying of the bulbs in the fall, the fighting through the harsh winter, the surprising blooms triumphant in the spring. Amy's sister walked up the stairs, cut flowers held in the fold of her arm, childlike. Paul stayed downstairs to look for a vase. When she came back down a while later, she said Amy had fallen back asleep. Said Amy needed to rest. I know she needs to rest, Paul said. I'm the one who told her to rest. Okay, she just needs to rest now. That's all I'm saying. I didn't mean anything. I'm sorry, Paul said, sitting back down. Been a long... I don't know. He looked off somewhere else. However long it's been. Her sister smiled just a little bit. Did the doctor say anything about... She started. No, the doctor didn't say anything. Paul walked her to her car, nodded as she drove off. After she was gone, he walked across the street to the woods. Paul had often thought of Amy's sister in many ways. Then she had twins, and he didn't think of her as often. The twins going into middle school next year, and Amy's son from her first marriage, now grown, living in Cincinnati. After Amy's sister had gone, Paul gave her a few minutes in case she'd forgotten something, needed to come back. Then he put a hand on the front door, eased it open, and crossed the road, stepped across the ditch, into the brushy weed before the trees where the boy had disappeared. The lot for sale sign, faded from red and white, still against the tree hanging from one nail. A new name and phone number nailed against the old one. Paul walked into the woods, stepped across the fallen pine limbs, the brown and browning leaves along the ground. 20 feet from the edge of the woods, he found the boy's hideout. A slight depression in the ground, maybe 2 feet, covered with a sort of lean-to of limbs and an old blanket. Paul leaned underneath, saw a pile in the corner. A garden gnome, a peeling cigar box, a small trophy with what must have been a tennis player standing on top of it, stubs of arms reaching up like some forgotten piece in the corner of a museum. No whiskey bottles, no cigarettes, no rain-soaked, clumpy pages of naked women he'd never be with. Just fragments from the nearby houses, glimpses of neighbors, the flyers wedged into mailboxes in the spring. If you see any suspicious activity, the emails going back and forth, neighborhood watch, the county deputies adding Mallard Place and Bufflehead Boulevard to their daily routes. All because this boy had taken this made-in-China ship's lantern fitted for votives from the deck of that brick house with the front-facing garage everyone complained about. Paul leaned under the roof of the place, started to ease a shoulder in. Then he stood up, rolled one of the logs back, and slid through the wider opening, slid the log back behind him. When he got back to the house, Amy's sister was back, sitting in her car, cell phone to her ear. Paul walked over to the driveway, knocked on her window. She shook, dropped the phone, rolled down the window. I was just trying to call Amy, she said. I knocked. You didn't answer. He said he was out. He might have made an explanation to someone else. Did you fall? She asked, stepping out of the car. Your shoulder, the mud. No, he said. I'm fine. He walked her down the sidewalk, through the overgrown mint and lavender to the front door. I brought Amy this book, she said, pulling a crinkled paperback from her shoulder bag of a purse. She offered Paul the book. A mystery novel by a woman he'd never heard of. He turned the book over. Costa Rica, where Amy and RJ, her first husband, had honeymooned. You'd love it, she told Paul once when he'd walked in on her looking at photo albums. It was like Eden. Paul held the novel. You can come in if you want, or I give it to her, he said to Amy's sister, who said that was fine, that she needed to get back to the twins. Then he waited behind the front window, watched her get back into her station wagon, back down the hill, turn and leave the development. Paul thumbed through the novel, reading the place names. Nicoya, Cartago. Oh, you should have seen the rains in San Pablo, she'd said. Drowned rats, she said. She had told Paul they should go back, that he would enjoy the landscapes, the exotic plants, though she couldn't remember any of their names. She called down the stairs to him. He set the book on the yard sale table by the front door, walked up the stairs. 5 weeks, she said. That's all I can think of. Then the soft cast. Then we can go somewhere, do something. We can go back to Memphis. He said it was too late to go back. She said maybe someplace new, someplace neither of them had been. He said he hadn't been many places. You always say that, she said. You always make it sound like I'm some world traveler. Aren't you? Don't be like that, she said. I said let's go someplace, me and you. It can be old or new, it doesn't matter. What's wrong with here? He asked. We can get the garden back, start that grove in the back. Someplace to put a swing set in a few years. Is that what this is about? Jesus, Paul. Can't we not talk about that, please? Jesus God, Paul. He swallowed. It's fine, it's just that, he started. I know it's just that, Sweets, I know. You heard what the doctor said. This time didn't work out. You heard what she said. We can try again. I know. Just not now. Let's not talk about it now. Let's talk about where we want to go, what we want to see. Paul said maybe they should stay close to home for a while, just in case. We can try anywhere, she said, and if it happens, it happens. Sometimes... She stopped. Well, we're not getting any younger. He said he knew that. What do you mean? We already talked about this. Paul looked at the photo on her nightstand, of her son in Cincinnati, the get well card he'd overnighted her. He looked across the bed to his nightstand, the lamp, the magazine. You just can't imagine how difficult it is to get up at 2 a.m, to feed a baby, to keep up with the shots, the flu, the diapers, all of it. I mean, at 20, it was hard enough. You just can't imagine, Paul. You really can't imagine. He said he could imagine that. He could imagine every moment, every year, every birthday cake. He said he really could imagine it. It was all he could do. I'm just tired, that's all. I'm sorry, Paul. He said that was fine, pulled her covers up to her neck. Said he was going downstairs to watch the game, to let her rest. When he got to the bottom of the stairs, he took the novel off the table, eased open the front door. As he crossed the street, he waved to a minivan with a woman inside. He didn't know her, and she didn't wave back. When she'd gone around the corner, he crossed the ditch into the woods. He opened the book, peeled the last few pages out, then set the novel against the little trophy, at a slight angle, leaning, like a family portrait, on someone else's mantle.
That was Scott Detrow reading The Window by Steve Weddle, originally published in the charity anthology Off the Record 2 at the Movies. That anthology also happens to include one of my stories, American Beauty. Anyway, you can find more about Steve's writing at his website, steveweddle.com. That's Steve, WEDDLE.com. That does it for this episode of Title 18 Word Crimes. Thanks for listening. If you like the show, don't forget to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher. And if you really like the show, please leave us a review at iTunes or Stitcher. Subscribe to Word Crimes right now, and you won't miss upcoming stories by authors like Chris Holm, David Cranmer, and Anthony Award winner Johnny Shaw. Don't hesitate to get in touch with us directly. Scott Detrow is on Twitter at Scott, Detrow, and you can find me at ericarneson.com. That's ERIKARNESON.com. I'm also at Eric Arneson on Twitter and easy to find on Facebook. Every episode of the Word Crimes podcast is archived at ericarneson.com. Check out the page for this episode to find links to Steve Weddle's website and much more. The music on this episode is by The Throws. You can find them at The Throws, THROES, thethrows.com. Thanks again for listening to Title 18 Word Crimes. We'll be back real soon.